Hey, are you thinking about moving to Tampa but you've got a lot of questions? Well, stay tuned because I've got the answers. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into my channel Living in Tampa, where it's my goal to show you everything you need to know about eating, sleeping, playing, and living in the greater Tampa Bay area. Hey, if it's your first time to my channel, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, ring the little bell so you'll be notified every time that I release a new video. So today's video is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to take questions that I get from people. I get people every day calling me, asking me questions about Tampa Bay, and I love it. So this video, I'm going to take some of those questions and just put them all together into a video to try to help people out. And if you stay tuned to the end, I've also got a bonus question for you. So let's get to it. So the question that I get asked the most about is the Tampa Bay job market. So I did do a video on this entire topic all of its own that you probably want to check out because I go into a lot of detail about what employers there are in the area, what the average salary are for different types of jobs, and it covers all of that in a lot of detail, so I'm not going to go into that again on this video today, but I did want to go into moving to the Tampa Bay area when you don't already have a job here. A lot of times I find that my customers that are moving here to this area were brought here because of a job change, but lately with the ability to work remotely and growing by the day, there's a lot of people that are moving here and don't necessarily have to have a job in the area. But if you are looking for a job in the Tampa Bay area, my top pieces of advice for you would be to go ahead and start applying to as many places as you can online. Luckily with today's technology, it's easy to do that and you don't have to be local to be able to get started on your job search. My second piece of advice would be for you to start to grow your network here in the area. You can do that through various social media websites. You can do that through LinkedIn. You can do it through Facebook. LinkedIn is probably the best though when you're talking about the jobs. Now of course you want to do your research, see what companies that we have here that are in your area of expertise, and make those connections at those different companies through LinkedIn or other social media that you might be using, and don't be shy. Let people know that you're looking for a job, let people know that you're planning to relocate here, and I find that it does help. The research that I've done shows that it does help to go ahead and remove your location from your resume so that that's not showing and not maybe a deterrent to some of the employers. And be prepared to discuss why you're moving to the Tampa Bay area in a job interview. But my main piece of advice would be for you to go ahead and start saving because you don't want to move here and be stressed out financially. So before you make the big move, if you're planning to move here without a job, I would say you want to have a good 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up before you even think about doing that. But moving to the Tampa Bay area without a job can definitely be done. I've helped a lot of people that have moved here that have done that. And again, it's so nice that you can get started on here on that before you're actually in the area. The second question that I get asked a lot is, should I rent or should I buy? Now, full disclosure, I am a real estate agent, so obviously I think it's better to buy. But I have done a lot of research on that, and rent prices are so high in our area that it definitely just doesn't make sense for you to rent instead of buying. It is proven that buying a home builds wealth. In 99% of the cases, if you're holding on to real estate long term, you're not going to lose money on it. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, hey, wait a minute, what about 2008? Yes, that happened, and yes, a lot of people did lose money. A lot of people had to go into foreclosure or short sale type situation, and that does happen, but it is a rarity. If you look over the long term, even now, those people that were in that situation, had they kept that house now, they would be making, a lot of money if they went to sell because the prices have gone up significantly. So that's all I'm saying, is that long-term owning real estate is a wealth builder. And of course you do have to take into consideration things like your credit. If you don't have the best credit, you might not be able to buy a home, but that can also affect your ability to rent a home. So you've got to look at that side of the coin too. A lot of people also say, well, it costs too much money for like the down payment and the closing costs for me to buy a home compared to renting a home. I've got news for you. in the Tampa Bay area, most people are going to want first, last, and security. And when you're adding up 3 months worth of payments, that equates to almost the same amount that you're going to need for your closing costs or your down payment on a loan, depending on what type of loan you qualify for. And of course, we can try to negotiate for the seller to pay some of your closing costs depending on what type of market we are in. Right now, December 2020, it is definitely a seller's market, and it's going to be very difficult to get a seller to pay your closing costs in this market. But it can be done, and in a lot of cases, we are able to work out something where the money that you would be bringing to closing is going to be about equal to what you're going to be bringing to the table when you go to rent a place. Now, another factor to take into consideration, of course, is the length of time that you're going to be here. If you're only going to be here a few short years, it might not make sense for you to buy a place, because the rule of thumb with real estate is you should own the property 5 to 7 years if you're intending to make a profit when selling it. And that's particularly true in the Tampa Bay area, because Florida does have very high closing costs when it comes to selling, so you are going to need to own that property longer than just a couple of years to make money on it. Unless, of course, the market is rapidly appreciating, then that wouldn't apply. But in most cases, normal market, you're going to need to plan to be here a good 5 to 7 years before you would be looking at any profit on buying a home. The other thing, is knowing the area. If you don't know the area, would it make sense for you to maybe rent for a little while to figure out which part of Tampa you like best before you buy? And yes, I think that's a great idea. I don't agree with people signing a long-term lease where you're locked in for a whole year, paying a lot more than you need to. But maybe you want to stay in an Airbnb for a few months, or extended stay hotel or something of that nature, while you're figuring out what part of Tampa or St. Pete appeals to you the most and where you think you'd be the happiest. I think that definitely makes some sense to do that. But definitely long-term buying is the best move in 99% of the cases. The third question that I get asked a lot is, what about the hurricanes? People seem to be terrified of the hurricanes. I totally understand that. Now, look, when you're moving to Tampa or pretty much anywhere in Florida, you're probably moving here because you want to be near the beach. You want to be near the water, and that does come with that risk, of course. Hurricanes hit Florida all the time. But Tampa Bay hasn't had a direct hit since 1921. Those are pretty long time. We've had a few scares, close calls since I've lived here. I've been here about 12 years. Hurricane Irma being the worst one. So I thought I'd share a little story about our experience with Hurricane Irma. So it just so happened that I was actually on a trip to Guatemala, a missions trip, just before Hurricane Irma hit. We actually got stuck in Guatemala and, thought we were going to be stuck in Guatemala, I should say, and they made us leave a day earlier than we originally were planning to. And the night before we were leaving, we actually got a major earthquake there in Guatemala. They woke us up in the middle of the night at the hotel and evacuated us from the hotel. It was pretty alarming. I hadn't experienced an earthquake since when I had lived in California, and this was definitely the strongest earthquake that I had ever experienced. Water was actually sloshing out of the hotel pool. That's how much the earth was moving, and it lasted pretty long, and it was quite scary. But anyway, the next day we were set to try to leave to get back to Tampa, and that's when we found out that Hurricane Irma, I guess, had changed course, and it was headed then towards Miami, which is where our plane was headed to, and we were actually one of the very last planes to leave the Miami airport to head to Tampa. It was surreal seeing the Miami airport almost completely empty, and apparently when we got in the air to leave from Miami to Tampa, when we were landing, we found out that the hurricane had again changed course and was now heading directly to Tampa. So I felt like it was chasing me around the world. It was quite scary. But my husband and all of the neighbors, they all banded together, and that's one thing that I really love about Florida. Whenever there's a crisis, the neighbors all come together. Everyone helps everyone. Whenever there's any type of hurricane, natural disaster, family emergency, the people here are phenomenal. And so there were 3 or 4 guys in the neighborhood that helped each other out. They were, putting up plywood on the windows and, sharing supplies, and it was fantastic. Well, the hurricane ended up not even hitting us, and we barely even got any hard winds, so it was a lot of scare pretty much for nothing in the end, at least where we were, because we live north of Tampa. But it was definitely a wake-up call for us, because we had become a little bit lax in our approach to the hurricanes. I mean, we're always prepared, and I would say definitely when you move to Florida, you always want to be prepared for the worst in case one of these storms does hit you. You want to be stocked up on water all the time. You want to be stocked up on non-perishables, paper products. You don't want to be those people that are rushing to the store just a few hours before the storm and all the shelves are empty and you're totally stressed out because you have nothing. You should just always keep those, stockpiles at home of batteries and things like that that you would need during an emergency. And we luckily have stocked up on those in the past, so most of the time when we hear that a major storm is coming, we're not panicking because we know we're already ready. But if you don't have those things, of course it adds to your stress level, and you definitely want to always be prepared. So the other thing that I did want to cover is that sometimes we do get tornadoes. Wait, we're not in Kansas or Texas, right? What we get tornadoes in Florida too? Yes. So apparently hurricanes spawn off tornadoes, and so that is something that you do need to be aware of. Florida is actually the #3 state for tornadoes, and just like a hurricane, you want to be prepared, you want to be aware, but obviously you don't want to let fear dominate your life on that. Every state has some kind of natural disaster, and I've actually got a link below that shows, things that have happened in each and every state in America. You can't move to a state where you're going to be completely safe from some sort of natural disaster. So I'd much prefer to live here in the Sunshine State and be happy. The question that I get asked a lot is about flooding. So yes, all of Florida is technically a flood zone. So basically, where you're choosing to live, you just have to pay attention to what flood zone the home is in and be aware of that, and know that you're going to have an additional cost for flood insurance in some cases. So flood zone X is the preferred flood zone. That does not require flood insurance and has the least risk of flooding. Next on the list, I guess, would be AE, and what that means is basically there is a 1% chance of a flood happening in a 100-year time period. So something to take into consideration. If you're in an AE, 9 times out of 10, depending on the elevation of the property and things of that nature, the flood insurance isn't going to be all that expensive. When you get closer and closer to the water, of course, the price of the flood insurance goes up, and when it's required is when it tends to get more expensive. When it's not required, you can typically get flood insurance for $1,000 a year, maybe $2,000 a year, depending on the level that the home is built on. So you have to have an elevation certificate, and it's very specific to the home itself and the location of the home. So it's hard for me to go into detail about the cost of that, but just know that it's something you definitely should be aware of. Definitely something when you're purchasing a home that you want to be asking about, and before you make any offers on the home, you would want to know what the cost of that flood insurance is going to be if it's required. And if it's not required, you probably want to go ahead and get it anyway, because in Florida there's always the risk of some flood happening. Not always just because of a hurricane, but also because of rain. When it rains here, I mean, it really rains. We have some serious thunderstorms, and the rain just comes down in sheets almost. And because Florida is so flat and we're right at sea level, it's really hard for the water to naturally drain away, and sometimes it can take a few days for that to happen. And when we get these torrential rainstorms like we get here, a lot of areas in Tampa, specifically in South Tampa, some of the streets will get flooded. Kennedy will get flooded, Southdale Mabry will get flooded, Bayshore will get flooded. Those are areas that you've just got to know when it's been raining really hard. You want to avoid those areas, and if you live in those areas, which are very desirable places to live, you also need to be aware that there will be times when you can't go out and drive on those streets. That's when most of the problems happen, is when people think, oh, it doesn't look that deep, I'm going to drive through, and then they end up getting stuck because the water is a lot deeper than it looks. So you never want to take that chance, and it's better when it's been raining hard and the streets are flooded, just to avoid that area. And the water will dry up in a few days and everything will be back to normal. But there are those times when floods do happen, and you definitely need to be aware of that. And something, just like California's got the wildfires, well, Florida, we've got our heavy rains, and we can have our flooding here for sure. I would highly recommend buying flood insurance, whether it's required or not. When it's not required, like I said, super cheap, and why not have that peace of mind? Another thing that I recently have started getting a lot of questions about is sinkholes. So that news story, I'm sure you heard about it, an area called Seffner, which is just to the east of Tampa. An entire house was swallowed up with a man inside by this massive sinkhole. And whenever that happened, it seems like it's been a few years ago now, my phone was just, ringing off the hook with people asking me questions about sinkholes, and the buyers that I was working with at the time, hey, is that home that I'm looking at, is that in a sinkhole area? Definitely something to be aware of, and probably you want to look at the map for where the most sinkholes have been found, and I'll link to that map down below. But again, for the most part, it's not something that you can be concerned about, because it's a natural phenomenon. We have no control over it. Sinkhole insurance, that's really something that's not offered too much anymore now. Most insurance companies don't offer it. I think USAA will provide that for its military members, but it comes at a cost, of course. For the most part, though, I don't think you can get sinkhole coverage. You do get what is called a complete catastrophic coverage. So if the home was a complete loss, if it got swallowed up by a sinkhole, God forbid, it would still be covered by your regular insurance policy. But what happened was, when all these little sinkholes were happening, not really even true sinkholes like that one in Seffner. We're just talking about a little soil movement, ground shifting, and homes were getting little cracks in them. People were making claims for that and just collecting the money and not actually fixing the home. And so, of course, that was driving the price of the insurance through the roof, and it got to just a point of ridiculousness where, the insurance companies decided to no longer offer it. Fixing a sinkhole is very expensive, even if it's just one of the smaller ones. They have to pump thousands of pounds of concrete underneath the home, and it's quite a process that they go through, very costly, and people were just collecting $100,000 and never making the repair on their house. So that happening over and over again led to the insurance companies just saying forget it. And so here we are, you can no longer get sinkhole coverage. But again, something to be aware of, but not something that we necessarily need to worry about all the time. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to cover today is, what about the alligators? I get asked that one so much. It kind of cracks me up, because it's not something that I've actually spent much time thinking about. When we first moved here, maybe I was a little cautious, should I say. We do have so many different bodies of water here in the Tampa Bay area, and pretty much every single body of water that there's a gator in. I'll have buyers that I'm showing them a house and there's water behind it, and they always ask me, do you think there's a gator in that pond? I'm like, yes, there's definitely a gator in that pond. There's a gator in every pond. Do you need to worry about it? Not really. If you leave them alone, they're going to leave you alone 99% of the time. I've never come across, an aggressive gator. They're usually just out there on the banks, sunning themselves. Now, dogs are a different story. If you have a house and it backs to a pond, you don't want to let your dog run out there. I'm sure you saw the video recently where this gentleman, his dog got in the pond and he saved his dog. You see right here, he's saving his dog. This is pretty amazing. I don't know. I love my dogs. I really do. But I think I would have been a little too scared to jump in that water and fight that alligator, although he is pretty small. But yeah, that will happen. They are animals. They need to eat. So if there's something that looks like it would be a good meal for them, they're going to attack it. So keep your dog away from the water. But also, we have an alligator trapping service. Most counties will offer that. If you feel threatened by an alligator that's in the body of water, you know, in your neighborhood or behind your home, you can call them. If the alligator has been showing any signs of aggression, they will come out and remove that alligator. We've had to do that once at our house when the gator was getting a little bigger than we were comfortable with. We called the county, and they did send out a gentleman, and it was quite interesting to watch. I never knew how they caught these alligators, but this guy shows up with this truck and a big cage on the back and a couple of fishing poles. I was like, what are you going to do with those fishing poles? And the only tool that he had with him was a tape recorder, and he went down to the pond, and he was funny. This guy was so funny. He said, well, I asked him, what are you going to do with the tape recorder? And he said, don't you know that alligators like rap music? And I was like, what? And he said, come on, I'll show you. So I followed him down there. He sets the tape recorder down on the bank, and he presses play. And of course, it's not rap music, but he plays tape of baby alligator sounds. And as soon as those noises went out of that tape recorder, it was amazing. You could hear the alligator hit the water and come swimming across, and it basically drew the alligator out from where it was, and he took his big fishing pole and he launched it over this long line, and it went around the alligator and scared it, and it started to do the spin thing that it does, and it wrapped itself up in this fishing line, this really thick fishing line, and he pulled the gator in like that, and that is how he caught it. It's just using a tape recorder and a fishing pole. I was absolutely amazed. But yeah, they do that all the time, and if you feel threatened by one, you can absolutely call your county and have it removed. But for the most part, if you leave them alone, they're going to leave you alone. Well, you've stayed tuned for this long, so you've earned your bonus question. The question that I get asked a lot is about commuting and traffic, and I'm here to tell you that Tampa's traffic is pretty mild. When you compare it to the rest of the country, you're not going to be looking at a long commute time, especially now. It's December of 2020. We're in the middle of coronavirus. The streets are pretty empty. You can get, around town without sitting in too much traffic. But during normal times, you will have your bottlenecks. Of course, if you're going on 275, it always backs up around downtown. If you're going over any of the bridges that go, to St. Pete or to Clearwater, those always tend to back up during rush hour traffic. But for the most part, anywhere that you live in the Tampa Bay area, the longest probably commute that you're going to be looking at is still going to be well under an hour. And even if you live really far north, for the most part, you're going to be under an hour. But that brings me to another question, is like, how long does it take to get to the beach? And pretty much the same answer applies for that, because anywhere in the Tampa Bay area, if you want to be over to some of the world's best beaches like Clearwater, anywhere from Clearwater all the way down to St. Pete, none of those are going to be a very long commute. You're probably less than an hour from most places. If you're down closer to the southern part of Tampa, just going over the bridge and down over to the water, you're probably looking at more like half an hour. So it really depends on where you end up living, but definitely less than an hour from pretty much anywhere to be in the nation's best beaches. There's no place quite like Tampa. Well, there you have it. The 5 questions that I get asked the most by people that are moving to the Tampa Bay area. I hope that helped answer the questions that you may have. If there's any others that I didn't touch on, feel free to drop them down below in the comments section. And hey, if you're even thinking about moving to the Tampa Bay area, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can give me a call, send me a text, shoot me an email. However you want to communicate with me is fine. I'm always available, and when it comes to moving to Tampa, I've got your back. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, ring the little bell so you'll be notified every time that I release a new video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.